The following Agios-supported podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please speak to a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. The guests on today's show were paid to participate in this podcast.
What's up, Cheat Codes listeners? It's me, Dr. Z.
And me, Dr. C.
Dr. C, we got another great episode lined up today for Warriors.
I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, man, today's episode is for people living with sickle cell disease, of course, but also for families and caregivers and clinicians and anyone who's walking the journey with them. Today we want to talk about something that, you often hear about when new treatments are being discussed, which is this kind of nebulous word, approval. You heard that word before, Dr. Mike?
I've heard about it. I have to say though, until I started working at Agios, I didn't have any idea what went into it.
I'm totally with you. It felt like there was just some guy in a room with a rubber stamp, but definitely feels like there's a lot more than that. So that's what we're going to get into today, the mechanics of what does it actually mean when a medicine gets approved? How does it get approved? Does that approval mean the story's done? And then we'll talk about methods to which we get to approval. How does that sound, Dr. C?
That sounds good. And we have a great guest with us today who's gotten quite a few drugs approved in her career. And I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Gheuens.
I was going to be really overwhelmed if it was going to be you and I talking about the mechanics of this. But having our chief medical officer, the head of R&D, Dr. Sarah Gheuens with us is just the exact right guest. So I'm ready to jump into it if you are, Dr. Mike.
Let's get to it.
Sarah, we have had the opportunity to work alongside with you for the last, 5-ish years now, Dr. C, I think.
I'm fast.
Certainly one of the advantages for me was being around somebody who was a seasoned vet, had been around this process, felt to me like I was doing a second fellowship. For the Warriors who may not have had the opportunity to run into you at a sickle cell meeting yet, why don't you tell the Warriors a little bit about who you are?
Okay, well, I'm Sarah. I am indeed the head of R&D and chief medical officer at Agios Pharmaceuticals. A mouthful, but basically what that means is that we have a whole team working on different drugs that we're trying to study to see if they work in specific diseases, see if they're safe in specific diseases, and we're trying to get these to the approval process, which is, the topic of today's discussion as well. Well, you hear I have an accent. I'm originally from Belgium, but have been in the States for a very long time by now. I'm a physician. I'm a neurologist, actually, so not a hematologist, but, in drug development, you go through different fields of study. I had the fortune to work with different rare disease communities along this career trajectory. And of course, like now working with the sickle cell disease community has been one of the highlights, trying to drive change here with the team.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I know you're on paper a neurologist, but in my head you're a hematologist.
Okay.
That's what comes
Nice.
across. I don't know how it is for you, Dr. C, but that's how I feel.
No, for sure.
Agios is a biopharmaceutical company striving to redefine the future of rare disease treatment. Fueled by connections, we build trusted partnerships with rare disease communities, collaborating to develop and deliver innovative medicines with the potential to transform lives. To learn more, visit us at agios.com. That's agios.com. To join the conversation with other patient allies, follow us on Instagram at Ally Voices Rising. That's Ally, A-L-L-Y, Voices Rising.
So, Sarah, let's dive a little bit into just off the ground for patients who are listening right now, who may have lived with sickle cell disease their whole life, who've seen the treatment landscape change rapidly, dynamically, who live in this flux of hopefulness, but also being cautious, who are trying to grapple with new treatments as this landscape changes very rapidly. What outlook do you encourage these patients to have as they're thinking about new treatment landscapes?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's indeed hard, right? Because change is hard, even if it's positive change. Sometimes change is hard, and it's also not always easy, I think, for people to understand if they're making right choices or not. There's always like gray areas in everything. So I think when new treatments are coming across, it's really an advancement for the field. And if there is a disease that deserves new treatments, it is definitely sickle cell disease, just because of the complexity of the disease, all of the different issues that people have to grapple with. We are far from having solutions for the totality of the disease here. So what we're trying to do now, and many people are trying to really create solutions by developing new drugs. And these new drugs, what is I think key, may be good for some people, but may not be the right choice for other people. So as people are thinking about these things, moving through the drug development process and going across the finish line and getting, to approval, I think the most important thing that people can do is ask questions. When they engage with their physicians, or other, healthcare providers, it's really just important to ask the questions that you want to ask. And sometimes I think people hold back on asking all of the questions they actually deep down want to ask. So I think that is one of the biggest things you can do for yourself, is making sure you ask whatever it is that you want to ask. And what I would also say or encourage is, when you are thinking about, hopefully there are going to be at some point many choices to pick from, you'll need to take some time and, have more detailed discussions with physicians. Sometimes you've already asked the question, but you want to ask it again, just to make sure you understand completely. That's good. I'm personally somebody who needs to have information repeated, to myself, like over and over. I know the team sometimes think like, well, I already told you so, but that's okay, because sometimes I just need a moment to fully wrap my brain around things, and I think that is important when you're considering different options.
Well, I have a question to start it off. So we often hear the term FDA approved, and it sounds like a green light, and it is important. But I guess taking a step back, what does it mean to be FDA approved to a patient in plain language?
Yeah, so FDA approved, it's a very big step, right? It means a drug has gone through rigorous testing, and that we understand the benefits it can bring to a patient with a specific disease. And it also means we understand the safety as it was studied in the clinical trials. So before you get to approval, there are different phases of clinical development that typically happens, and I think we should start probably there to get to that approval step. So when you are allowed to test a drug in people, first you start with a phase 1 that is typically in people who do not have a disease. And what you're trying to do there is just test different doses, look for the safety, so potentially bad things that can happen to a person, to make sure that you really understand the basics of the drug. Mostly focused on safety in that phase of development. Then you move, if all goes well, to phase 2. Phase 2 is typically where patients participate. It's a bigger clinical trial. You continue to study the safety of the drug, but now you're also looking at efficacy. So efficacy being the good things that a drug can bring within a disease. And often what you do there is you look for some data that will suggest that when you do a next trial, you are actually able to demonstrate what we call benefit. And so when that phase 2 is a good trial and you have been able to demonstrate efficacy, the good things, you've still studied safety, so you understand a little bit more about the potential side effects. And these are, okay for what we're trying to do within the disease. You move on to this phase 3. Phase 3 is typically a bigger group of people that participate in the trial. Some people will get the drug, other people will not get the drug. And that is because we want to make sure that when we get at the end of the trial, the efficacy is demonstrated in such a way that it is just not, a fluke, but really like an official sort of test of, is this drug really better? If you are living with this disease and you take this drug, you are really going to have a better outcome than if you would not have taken this drug. And so I think that is what a phase 3 is trying to do. It's really trying to demonstrate how much better a patient can expect to feel when they are taking the drug. And then you'll also understand more the side effects, because you've tested in a bigger group of people. And like I said, some people will not have taken the drug and other people will have taken the drug. So for instance, this is an imaginary example. If a lot of people on the drug experience a headache and nobody in the group, or fewer people experience a headache when they're not taking the drug, then you may think that headache is part of the safety profile of this drug. And then physicians will say to the patients at the end of the trial, you can expect to feel less tired with this drug, but you may also experience a headache. So that way people can understand all of the good things and all of the bad things at the end of a trial. And so when you have that data, or all of that information, then it gets submitted to regulators across the world, of which, of course, for the US, the FDA is the regulator.
Sarah, can I ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
Along the way, as you describe these different phases of therapy, as the drug development process goes on, are you in touch with the FDA? Is this the first time they're hearing about it when you submit something? Or
No, yeah.
tell us about that.
Well, it starts before you actually start the clinical trials, the engagement with the FDA. So before you are allowed to proceed with a clinical trial, you already submitted, the study you want to do. You've submitted some what we call preclinical data, because typically drugs, before they go into humans, are tested in animals. So that data goes for review, and they will make sure that whatever you propose for your first trial is, a safe way to assess the potential benefits of a drug. And so that happens along the way. That we keep an eye on all of the safety along the way, but the FDA does so as well. And so for the big trials, the phase 3 program that I've just described, you also go engage before that you start that trial, to make sure that when that trial is completed, results will have come out of that trial that they can take a look at to make their own assessment on the benefit and the risk. So you have many engagements alongside with the agency. Obviously, everybody who is working on this ultimately has the same goal: to deliver drugs that are safe and effective in the context of these different diseases.
So when I started, I sort of naively thought, there's like a guy sitting in a room and he's looking at your clinical trial data and he's like thumbs up or thumbs down. But getting into working on this, I've realized FDA looks at a lot of stuff. They, from preclinical animal data that you mentioned, to how you manufacture the drug, and how you chose the dose that you're using, and is it the appropriate dose. So what does that FDA actually review, and who is that team, and what are they looking at when they decide thumbs up or thumbs down on a drug?
Well, it's a big team of people, just like it's a big team on our end to get these drugs across the finish line. So for each of the different aspects that you have mentioned, they have a different group of people that look at those specific aspects of a drug. So how the drug is made, indeed, is one of those. Because it's important, of course, that the pills that are made, or any type of drug that is made, that is of a good quality. So they will look at that and all of the parameters that are associated with that. They have a safety team looking at all of the data that comes in across the board. They have people that are really trying to make sure that the endpoint, the endpoint is the measure that we use to assess benefit, that is something that is really meaningful to patients. So in their definition, it has to be something that makes people feel better and or function better and or survive better. So they'll make sure that, you know, the patient population you've studied is representative of the overall patient population. They will make sure that the way you've looked at benefit is the right way to look at benefit. They will make sure that enough patients have been studied to make a good call on both efficacy and safety. So then the animal data is, of course, reviewed by people who have a specialty in that. So there are so many different people involved in this to make sure that what comes to the market in the US is, is the right thing.
And it really sounds like the questions being asked by the people studying the drug and the people reviewing the drug are really in sync, right? Does the drug work? Is it safe? Can we trust that it's reliably made? Will doctors and patients understand how to use the drug in the treatment landscape? So thank you for walking us through that, Sarah. That was very helpful. My next question for you is related to sort of that, after phase 3, that next bridge in terms of crossing over into this approval territory. There's not just one way in which we talk about approval, right? Often we hear terms thrown around, things like traditional approval, accelerated approval. I think it'd be really nice to have a discussion on what the differences are between those two pathways that a molecule could take.
Yes. So that's another complex topic, but full approval really means that the evidence that was generated in the clinical trials, both from a clinical perspective and a statistical perspective. So statisticians here are important because you want to make sure that what you look at is not just random chance, but is a real thing. When you go for full approval, it means that the clinical trials have delivered data that hit on that endpoint definition, feel, function, and or survive, has generated that positive data in those trials, and that the risks were well, documented within those trials. And ultimately, there is a call that the benefit observed in the trial outweighs those side effects observed in the trial. So typically, people deliver 2 trials, what we call 2 well-designed randomized controlled trials. Meaning that, again, some people took the drug, some people were on a sugar pill, and we really were able to establish the same type of benefit within those 2 trials, and they support each other, basically. That's the sort of the classic pathway to get to a drug that is fully approved. Accelerated approval means that you have a trial in which you were able to show some benefit, but that benefit is not yet at that feel, function, and or survive definition. So for instance, hemoglobin values are a good example of this. Hemoglobin is used to measure anemia or the severeness of your anemia. Hemoglobin by itself, though, is considered a laboratory parameter. So it's not considered something that hits on feel and or function and or survive as a classic endpoint. So in the context of sickle cell disease, when you hit on a hemoglobin endpoint or when you deliver that positive result, that is considered something that is likely to predict additional benefit in another trial, but by itself is not considered that classic endpoint that can lead to full approval. And so typically this approach is used in diseases that are very severe, and sickle cell disease obviously is a very severe disease. And why they do that is because there is so much evidence in the trial that they believe like that benefit will be confirmed in another trial, but they don't want to withhold that drug from people being able to use it in real life, in the clinics and in the real setting, in the real world. And so that's why that pathway exists, to make sure that people can get access to a drug faster because of the data that was already observed. And then safety, of course, in either of those pathways remains very important, both for full approval and accelerated approval. The risks need to be well described. I think what is important here, if you get full approval or accelerated approval, safety will continuously be studied. So whenever a drug goes to the market, we continue to collect at potential side effects that may occur, because sometimes it takes a while or you need many patients to be able to come up with something that is very rare. And so that information continues to be collected, and that's where sometimes you will see for drugs that are on the market, labels being updated with new safety information.
That was something that I didn't know about very well when I came to Agios. I had, maybe offhand said, oh, I had a patient who was on this and they got a headache or something, and then I would get a questionnaire in the mail. We heard your patient had a headache. Can you tell me about it? And when I got to Agios, I learned about pharmacovigilance, and that when you have an approved drug, pharma has to follow all of the potential things that show up in the literature, or that anybody tells them anytime, and really strict rules about it. So could you enlighten the warriors out there about how seriously pharma takes safety after a drug is approved?
Very, very, very seriously. To your point, Mike, sometimes it happens that in a clinical trial, the trials they end at a certain point in time, right? And sometimes that's just a 1-year trial, maybe a 2-year trial, and then it ends. But sometimes a drug, it may take 10 years for something to come up. And so what we do is we continue to collect all of the information as gets reported to us, to your point, in papers, via conversations, things that physicians tell us. We continue to look at all of those different sources of information forever, basically, forever and ever, to make sure that nothing new pops up that we didn't know about yet. And so if something new would pop up in collecting more information, then we make sure that gets into the label if that is something that we believe is due to the drug.
And that label is sometimes called the package insert. It's like
Yes.
it's like a document that they actually put in the bottles of pills that
Yes.
tell the doctors and the patients all about the drug, what it's made of, how people use it. And that itself is something that you work with FDA on. How does a label come into existence? And
Yes.
how can patients use a label?
Yeah, so the label is indeed a summary of everything that happened on the drug. So it tells you what the drug can be used for. So, like the first part of the label will tell you this can be used for sickle cell disease, for instance. And then there's different parts of the label that describe all of the different things we've touched upon earlier. So part of it is the animal data, part of it is all of the clinical trial data, both from an efficacy perspective and the safety perspective. We also highlight what type of patient participated in the clinical trial, because that's important for physicians when they look at the profile of patients that participated. They will make sure that the patient in front of them, is sort of similar to that patient population, because otherwise maybe the drug wouldn't work, right? So it's kind of that type of call. So that's focused on the physician. There is typically also a section of the label that is in more not technical details, but more lay language, as you said earlier. And that's where patients can look at, they can read the whole thing, of course, but like there is a section that sort of summarizes in a little bit more friendly language the good things and the bad things of a drug in as well. And that's a patient information leaflet.
I wanna circle back, Sarah, to that word accelerated approval, because I'm imagining myself in a clinic room, and somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, there's this treatment, and it's received accelerated approval." When you hear the word accelerated, your default is, "Wow, people went fast," right? So I want to just double click on this idea that what can you tell the warrior community listening about the concept that accelerated doesn't mean rushed or cut corners,
Right.
or
No, it
things
doesn't.
like this. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't mean cut corners at all. It just means like the concept that I described earlier is because if the disease is considered really bad and there needs to be, more treatment options, and there is already evidence, good evidence on the efficacy and the safety of the drug, it's just a way to try to get it to people that are outside of the clinical trial faster than just waiting for another full trial to complete. But the rigor of the original trial that led to this approval, the amount of data collected and the safety data gets scrutinized the same way as any other trial. So this really means that the agency has done their review and said, well, in the context of this disease, we believe that the benefits generated in this trial and the safety generated in this trial is worthy of pushing this forward. We do want you to run another trial, though, to make sure that you can confirm it again, or can confirm it in what is considered another clinical meaningful way, for instance, that hemoglobin response that you've observed. That means, though, if that next trial is not positive, that the FDA has it in their purview to say, okay, now we're gonna not allow this drug to continue to be on the market. That is something, though, that can happen to a drug, at any given time under full approval or accelerated approval because of safety reasons, what we just described. Sometimes it can happen that things really change and that at some point the risks described no longer outweigh the benefits of the drug, and then a drug can be removed at any given time point. So this is where it's important to understand that a point in time it's not static. You continue to learn as you continue to learn, basically, continuously on any drug forever.
Yeah, it's really a journey.
It's
And
a journey.
it really sounds like, the framing here is, sickle cell disease is a serious disease and warrants early access to therapies that might help people. But that early access comes with these follow-up requirements potentially. And that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah, it does. That being said, a full approval can also come with some requirements at the end that that agencies, and this happens often in rare disease, because if you think about it, like a rare disease versus something that is very common, like hypertension or diabetes, the amount of people living with diabetes is just a lot higher than the amount of people living with sickle cell disease. So the clinical trials you can run in the context of diabetes are just so much larger than the trials that you can run in a rare disease. And so often when there is a rare disease circumstance, there are some other things that you are committing to continue to study as it relates to long-term efficacy and long-term safety.
So, Sarah, at the beginning you mentioned ask lots of questions, and I love that. And I think a lot of times doctors and sometimes we use a lot of jargon and FDA terminology, medical words, and genuinely have expertise in medicine and in the diseases, but patients and caregivers have expertise in themselves and what their goals are and what their experiences have been in the past and their unique circumstances. So, putting that together, how should patients ask questions? What are important questions to ask? What would be your approach as a patient going in talking to your doctor about a drug that they might want to put you on?
Yeah. So first of all, like the jargon thing, I'm finding myself struggling with it here in the context of this podcast when we're talking about clinical trials, because before you know it, we're using a lot of jargon. Actually,
It's hard. You
it's
live in
really
that
hard.
language, and then most people don't. So
Yeah, and it's in abbreviations and so on and so forth.
the
So
abbreviation.
I think so first of all, I think if I would be a patient and would be in front of a physician, I would ask them to just first high level describe what the good things were and what the bad things were. I also think I would love to know what my chances are for having the good things happen to me. So, because not every drug works in everybody, and sometimes, people may think that if I take the pill, I'm automatically gonna get better. That's not always the case. So I would like, as a patient, to understand what are my chances here of having, the wanted effect of this drug, and how long will it take for me to have that wanted effect. Sometimes it also may be that you actually can feel better, and so then it's easier to understand that the drug is doing something for you. Sometimes you may not necessarily feel that the drug is doing something positive for you. So I would want to have the discussions with the physician, what they would be looking for to see. I would want to have the conversation, what I would want and what they would want to discuss those good things. And then for the bad things, I would try to understand how worried the physician is about those bad things, or is this something they can look for and help me with if it would occur to me? Those are the things that I would want to ask. I don't know, what do you guys ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are really important, great starting points. I think another thing is this isn't a one-time discussion. So
No.
if you have that discussion and you get to, I'm going to start the drug, then I think, after that, you repeat that discussion. This is what I'm experiencing. This is how it's going for me. What are you monitoring, and how do you think it's working? Should I stay on this drug? I think, it's a dialogue. It's not a time point.
Agreed. Fully agree. And that's where I think, like in the beginning as well, we were talking about it. Sometimes you just want to hear like an explanation again, right? You should totally do so. Totally ask whatever is on your mind. I think that's actually the biggest thing. Whatever is on your mind, I think you should feel free to ask.
Yeah, I think sometimes patients get, into this concept that asking questions might be taken as cynicism, being cynical, being critical. But I think it's really important to recognize that asking questions on your journey is it can be very aligned with still being hopeful, with still being positive, with being informed, with making the right next decision. There's no shame in having questions along the way and asking them very honestly to whoever's walking this journey with you, whether it's a physician, a sponsor, whoever it may be.
Yeah, agreed.
Sarah, once again, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us and sharing your learnings from your journey in sickle cell disease. I know even for you, this has been quite an exciting journey in working in a disease that so desperately needs reasons to believe. So thank you for all you've been doing for the sickle cell
Yeah,
community.
that
Thank you
goes
for
right
spending
back
time.
at you.
Thank you for spending time with the Warriors, as always. I think as we close, is there one final message you want to give Warriors from this conversation to think about as they move forward?
There's a couple, I think. I think one, I know that there has been a journey with ups and downs, and I feel like the community calling themselves warriors really signifies. I mean, it's a really appropriate term with everything, both on the disease and to be honest, everything that happened on the development front with ups and downs along the way. So I would say I really hope good change is coming with many, many, many options moving forward and for people to have many, many choices. As that happens, I think it is really key, be your own advocate, be your own, ask all of the questions you want to ask all of the questions from your doctors, from the regulators, from us, like from everybody. Everybody is really wanting to drive change forward in a positive manner. And so that means like connecting to each other to make sure all of the things that are needed are properly addressed. And then the third thing is like you guys, the two of you are really big advocates as well. And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah, so much. Dr. C, another great episode.
This was great. I think this will have to be the first of many with Sarah. I think I learned a lot on this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's always fun to sit down with Dr. Gheuens and hear a little bit about her thought process. I think as we close this episode, Warriors listening, I think for you all to just remember, research continues, learning continues, keep asking questions, identify what's known, identify what's being studied, identify how it applies to you. Remember that hope and questions can exist at the same time. Remember that your voice matters, your experience matters, and your questions are part of how your care gets better. Sarah, once again, thank you for joining us on Cheat Codes.
Thank you, boss.